Hi all. Apostasy. Is it a good thing? Is it wrong? Well, while I was doing some research on the word apostasy, I saw in a dictionary another word which was very like it. So I got really excited thinking, oh, maybe it's the same thing. Unfortunately, it's not, but I'm going to show you how in contexts, or in some contexts, it actually is exactly the same thing. It was very similar to the word apostle. Now, let me just read the two definitions for you. Apostle is the first or principal supporter of a new belief or cause. And then, of course, it says one of the 12 disciples of Christ. Apostasy, abandonment of one's religion, principles or political party. Now, they actually have the same root in apo, which in the Greek means to go away from. In terms of the apostles, it was talking about the going away from where they were to evangelize, to apostolicize to the nations. So that's when someone like Paul was called the apostle of the nations, because he went and was an apostle, an evangelizer, a missionary. Now it's interesting that the apostles were ones that were actually teaching a new faith, a new doctrine. It was stemmed from the old, but it was in effect new. To the Jews, it was an apostasy. It was a going away from what they had been taught. Now, that might sound strange to you, but seemingly, apostasy can be a very positive thing. Let me show you an example. We probably all know the one in Acts, where the apostles say the most famous line that they do before the Sanhedrin when they are called to stop their preaching, to stop being apostles. In Acts chapter 5, in verse 29, in answer, Peter and the other apostles said, "We must obey God as ruler rather than men." So these men were becoming apostates of the Judean faith to serve God as opposed to the words of men. Now I'm going to show you another example which we all know. Sorry, not an example, but more of a parallel. We all know Matthew chapter 24. Now this is talking about the faithful and discreet slave, starting from verse 45. We all know 45 to 47. I'll read that, but then I'm going to carry on. From verse 45, who really is the faithful and discreet slave, whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. But it carries on in verse 48, but if ever that evil slave says in his heart, my master is delaying, and he starts to beat his fellow slaves and to eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, and the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in that hour that he does not know. Isn't it funny how the slave can be caught unawares if he's not doing what is right, if he's not caring for his sheep properly, if he's not giving them their spiritual food at the proper time? Think of the amount of times that the faithful and discreet slave of Jehovah's Witnesses have got it wrong. You can argue that maybe they are receiving more light. But according to this, you have to be giving food at the proper time. And they obviously weren't at the proper time. Carry on with me from verse 51. And he will punish him with the greatest severity, and will assign him his place with the hypocrites. There is where his weeping and the gnashing of his teeth will be. To those that claim to be wise, and claim to be discreet, and claim to be this faithful and discreet slave, they are given a very, very clear warning. They do not do their job properly, they will suffer. Presumably, with all the child abuse cases and the disfellowshipping arrangement of shunning, and along with the issue of the blood transfusion being something that the governing body is not allowing people to do, and therefore they're people die because of not having blood transfusions, along with a long list of things that they are doing wrong, they must not believe that God is serious when he says that he will bring the greatest severity. Because if they did honestly believe that, they would be much more careful with how they produce their doctrine and where they get it from. They would treat the sheep with far more tenderness, with far more love. In the case of serving men, there's one last scripture I'd like to bring to your attention. For any of Jehovah's Witnesses who may be watching this, please, as an individual, you need to read this and question whether or not you are serving men or you are serving the true God. Romans chapter 14. Romans 14 and verse 12. So then, each of us will render an account of himself to God. It doesn't say that the faithful and discreet slave will render one for you. You can't turn around and say, well, they told me that it was the truth, and I was scared to think of my own, to think for myself, to reason for myself. This is saying to you that you are allowed to question what you believe, because you must render an account to God, no one else. Please take to heart that apostasy in itself can be the most positive thing, because you can decide to stand up for yourself, stand up for God, and stand up and be true. And that can mean that you stand up against what you did previously believe, which may well have been a lie. And the only way that you can possibly know that, the only way, is if you do research. If you're lazy and think, oh well, I can't research because I've been told not to, or because it's too difficult. God says to research, to find out. Please, people, wake up and see what it is. God's blessing all.